I'm Tammy Lea Meyer, and I'd like to welcome you to the Impact Economy Summit. I'm joined today by Michael Lewis and Michel Bauwens, and I'd love to take a moment to have you two, as peers, explore your work. So if you could start off, Michael, by talking about what's brought you here today.
Well, what's brought me here is really the thinking that I, with others, including Michel, but more people directly related to my field in terms of community economic development and local ownership and cooperative development, economic democracy, that I came here to try and see whether or not the world that I inhabit could in fact intersect with this world that people are talking about here around the digital commons and so on. I've worked in commons a lot. I've worked in fisheries and forestry and mining in terms of how do you bring community benefit and environmental protection into any of those kinds of sectors. So when I met Michel last year in Germany, I was like at sea, so to speak, and not necessarily understanding that world, but I think really, the leadership of Michel and some of our other colleagues in Europe have started to try and bring together these domains and the language and see how do we bridge movements between the commons movement, as Michel will talk about it, the economic democracy movement that I've been part of, and also the kind of environmental restoration, climate change, sustainability type folks. So that's really what brought me here. And I wanted to see Michel for a visit. So.
Great. And Michel, maybe you can share a little bit about your work.
Yes, so my work is very complementary to that of Mike. So I summarize it too easily, but he's working on territorial communities that are linked to a particular place. And today with the networks, there's a new kind of place, which is not a local place, but a translocal place. And so we have communities today which work on a global level, connecting around shared commons. So they create free software, open designs, open hardware, in which they share the technical and scientific knowledge for a particular sector of creating value. And there's also new technologies like distributed machinery, microfactories that allow to really relocalize production. So that's kind of the link with what Mike is doing. And so we look at convergence basically, right? So how can this new world of commons-based peer production connect with community development at a territorial level? And it's an open discussion, but there's a lot of convergence, commonality, and we need a lot of shared infrastructures because we are for creating value that is at the same time fair. So that's the solidarity economy, the cooperative economy, at the same time sustainable, in harmony with nature, and also that share knowledge. I think this is the new emphasis today is about, it's not ethical to find a solution to a problem in the world and just keep it for yourself for profit. You really have to spread it because there is an emergency. There's a climate emergency, there's an ecological emergency. So this is a period in which sharing knowledge is not a luxury; it's the very basis of what we have to do.
And how is it that we actually integrate these things? What's the critical path that you both can see within your own work and where it intersects?
Well, I think that's partly what's being explored, right? I don't think that we've got a well-defined critical path, but the world is changing. And decentralized production and the way in which technology and distributed networks are now possible, I think fit very well with the fact that if we don't decentralize, if we don't diversify ownership and distribute it differently, the kind of challenges we're going to face for adaptation, right, and the basis for reinvestment closer to home, or even within sectors like how do we transform the food system? That's a huge carbon producer, and it's also very much commodity-based. And the best innovations are getting decentralized, fair price, ecologically grown, and a different way of thinking about relationships between different parts of the value chain. So it's not always just territorial. It can also be sector-based. And then how do we govern those relationships then becomes very important. And I think these are the domains, the subject areas that bring us into play. I've definitely been thinking since I met Michel and started to, read Rifkin and some of these other people, that the decrease in the cost of production, this idea of a zero marginal cost, is radically implications for the way in which we're currently organized. It's already happening, but it hasn't taken shape for many of us in a way that we can understand or grasp. But, the technology that we see, how much does it cost to send an email? A lot less than a postage stamp, right? So those kinds of things are going. I think we got some huge questions, though, about how we deal with livelihood, how you capture value from an economic standpoint, and on what basis you reinvest.
Yes.
And share. Because if we don't do that, we ain't going to have the impact we need to have given the way power and control is exercised in much of our lives.
So part of what we're doing is we're on an inquiry. And so I'm really curious as to some of your questions that you're sitting with now, just to riff on what you've said.
Okay, so here's one difference. The way we used to work is people get a salary, they produce a product or a service, can sell it, and then the value you have, you pay people and you can reinvest. And it's very easy, predictable in a way. The new world is a bit different because we now have open systems that allow for contributions. So you have a lot of people will kind of communally contribute to a shared resource that is not immediately monetizable on the market. And so this is one of the big issues. This is one big inquiry, because what happens today is you have extractive systems. So you have Facebook, which is as an empty platform, has no value. Yet it monetizes everything and it doesn't reinvest in the community at all. Or you have 20 people working on a commons project and then 2 people get a contract, to do something that is based on the collective value, but there's no way to reshare that value, right? So this is one of the things. It's like we look into things like contributory accounting or fair shares, new ways of looking at ownership and governance. And so, this is something that's very important for these contributory communities. And this is one of the inquiries. How do we do that? Yes. Now, one of the things that we do is we observe what is already happening, because some communities are inventing those answers. And so bring that to the fore so that we can learn from each other. I think the big issue in both our systems is fragmentation. Mm-hmm. Everybody is doing his own thing, is feeling alone, and yet there's so many people doing similar things, so many people doing, for example, food. Yet in a country like Italy, only in the solidarity economy, in the community supported agriculture, there's 13 different ordering and purchasing systems. That should not be the case. They should have one open source system, and they can still adapt. But it's shared. The investment is shared, and the benefits are shared. And for that, you have to have platforms where people can learn from each other and share their advances.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So these platforms actually assist in what we call values added,
yes,
environmental and fair price added of a number of supply chains, right? And that's really, really important. I think to continue. That's where the platform. In fact, in Edmonton, we did a pilot on community-supported agriculture where we had 8 farmers. We had a pilot that we structured around 250 members, household delivery, fair price, all ecologically grown, based on these same principles. And it was like in 5 days, we had like 1,500 applications for membership. The farmers were very skeptical. But at the end of the day, that was the best prices they got for the least effort in terms of distribution, right? And so I think the experimenting, there's much more advanced systems than that. In Japan, in Korea, hundreds of thousands of people are part of co-investing and co-producing the food system. In the Edmonton context, of course, then you can go to platforms. The electronic platforms can be a basis upon which, again, the efficiency and the way in which people can co-govern and deal with extending shoulder seasons and so on and so forth. It's very, so we can see this stuff happening.
Yes.
I think the critical path to kind of moving it to the systems level is
Yeah.
partly what you're doing a lot of thinking
so
about.
you know,
right?
for example, a lot of people are doing this, but they're not working together yet. So how can you have one platform so that CSAs can learn from each other, integrate, you know, and help each other out? And then we have cooperative energy, you know, renewable energy, and then we have, you know, like healthcare, social care. And so the dominant system is already integrated through capital, but the alternative systems are fragmented.
Yes.
And so how can we look at, well, maybe less some.
There's some
right.
are organized.
Yeah. But so the thing is, like, how can we look at value streams in this new sustainable ethical economy?
Yes.
So that every initiative can support another one, right? And create these feedback loops. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to achieve now.
And so part of what we're doing is we are a part of a movement that's building. And so some of what you gentlemen are both accessing today is how do we do that, and how do we link our efforts together to be able to build the momentum that we need as a collection of movements. So maybe you can both close with a little thinking into that.
Well, I know even in terms of our own organization, which has had many different legal forms, but from the very beginning, the people who were working in it, their time and their contribution and their cash, they had to build that. So we had equity inside the system, right? That created value in the process. So that, as a basis for creating investment in something that has potential for sustainability, is obviously basic principle. We've also got examples, and there's many, but in Japan, Saikatsu Consumer Cooperative, which is really amazing in terms of all the things I said about food previously, but members actually on a voluntary basis contribute $11 a month up to $3,500. The consumer cooperative has $450 million in equity inside the system. That gives them in financial stability, gives them a basis for reinvestment. It gives them, you know, and that sits there until a member takes it out. And most members just don't take it out unless they really have to, right? So you're creating a framework within social capital, federating people from a local to a regional, to a national level in Japan. Those are the kinds of structures we need. And they're involved in political resistance around GMOs. Now they're involved in social care, and they're involved in green energy. So you can see how it kind of built out from a little group of women who got together and say, how can we get nutritious food that's ecologically grown and give a fair price in return, to a federated system across the country that's got hundreds of thousands of members. You know, and part of our difficulty, I think, is that the nature of the crisis we're in, it's like we got to get organized a little bit faster than sometimes my own experiences told me how long it can take sometimes, right?
Some last thoughts on the momentum and building the movement.
Well, actually, you know, it may be counterintuitive, but one of the things that we need to do is just talk to each other. And so, for example, a gathering like this one, and I organize them as well twice a year, is really deep conversations. You take a few people from this world, a few people from another world, and then you just take 3 days to understand each other's perspectives, and you can, you know, relay your experience, and so we need much more of those. We need really, you know, much more mesh working, weaving. And based on that, create these structures, these enduring institutions that, you know, that we can learn and move faster.
And so, Michel Bauwens, how do people find out more about your work?
Okay, I have a website, or we have a website, p2pfoundation.net, which has 20,000 articles on everything that is open input, participatory process, and commons-oriented output. So whether it's business or spirituality or politics, you'll find it in our place. We also have another site, commonstransition.org, which is politically oriented towards how do we change the world in that direction.
Great. And Michael Lewis?
We have a website, communityrenewal.ca, and it also has a lot of documentation from a magazine that we ran for 21 years and all kinds of codified knowledge that we've kind of put into play and made it available to people over the last 30 years.
Wonderful.
I just want to say one thing. It's Mike and Pat Conati wrote a book called The Resilience Imperative, Cooperative Transitions Towards a Steady State Economy, and it's really a marvelous book. It has everything about all the kind of commons in housing, food, renewable energy, and how to get there. You all find it in that book.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you both so much for being a part of the Impact Economy Summit. And we look forward to more updates from some of our brilliant thinkers that we have here.
Thanks, Tammy.